Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to Growing Through It, a podcast dedicated to bringing you clarity so that you can harness your curiosity and be the creator of your life. Hosted by me, Shanae Rowe. Hello, all my beautiful cherubs. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm very happy to have you here listening along. Welcome to today's episode, which is number 19, and I want to be talking about loneliness. So, yeah, it's just like a little episode on unpacking the feeling of loneliness and its purpose in becoming grounded in our aloneness. So, I want to talk about what loneliness is, what creates it, what it can reveal to us. Lots of goodness in this episode, I think, because, I think a lot of us, most of us, all of us, at one point or another has felt lonely, does know what it feels like. It's such a strong emotion, and it's a very common thing to feel. Like, loneliness is such a common thing to feel, except the one thing that it does is make us feel like no one in the world feels it as well. It isolates us, and it has this sneaky little way of making us feel like we're the only person in the world that could possibly be feeling lonely right now. We're all alone, we have no one to turn to or talk to or connect with, and like, it makes it so much harder to go and connect with people and talk to people about how lonely we're feeling, because we in our minds have created this idea that actually no one else feels lonely and it is only me, and no one is going to be able to understand, because how could they? Because they don't feel lonely. They mustn't. I'm the only one. So I want to talk about like what loneliness is first off, and it's an emotional state. You've probably heard people talk about lonely versus alone and what the difference is and how they're not the same. And so loneliness is an emotional state, whereas feeling alone is actually a physical state. Like, you can be physically alone and you can feel emotionally lonely. Or you can be physically, not alone. You can be in a group of people and still feel the emotion of loneliness. So that's sort of the distinguisher between the two. Alone is a physical state, whereas loneliness is an emotional state. What loneliness is, it's like a fundamental craving and need for connection. But specifically, what causes like the loneliness is when that need and that necessity of connection isn't being met. So, from time to time, we can feel like we're not connecting with people, we're not having in-depth conversations and things, and feel like that aspect of our lives is lacking, but that doesn't really necessarily mean that we are feeling lonely or we're going through a period of loneliness. Because, loneliness is like a period of time where we're experiencing a desire for connection, but that connection isn't being fulfilled. We haven't found it. We're craving it. So there's a bit of a gap between a desire for social connection and the experience of it, right? We want it so desperately, but we don't feel like we are receiving it. And it's a really painful thing to experience when we're wanting to be vulnerable with people, we're wanting to open up, we're wanting to have, really beautiful, meaningful connections and conversations and topics of interest to talk about with another person or a group of other people. It's really painful when we are yearning for that, but we feel like we're not receiving it. Like, you feel so isolated and separated from other people, and it's almost like, you feel like even though you want those things, what's the point? Because clearly it doesn't exist out there. It's such a complex emotion, and things like self-doubt can come into play. You feel really separated and isolated. Low self-esteem as well, like, because you feel like you're not receiving this connection, this core innate part of being human. You're not receiving this experience, and so your self-esteem plummets, and that can actually prevent us from actually going out and making those connections, from meeting new people and finding that connection. Is our self-esteem drops, and then we don't feel worthy of actually going out there, or, we get in our minds about, ourselves, and we don't feel like we're good enough, or we judge ourselves, or we think really poorly of who we are as people, and that maybe we're not even deserving of having these beautiful connections with people. Which then in turn, like when you are in social situations, you can get a lot of anxiety, because if your self-esteem is low, then you're going to be constantly feeling like people are judging you, they're criticizing you, they are, thinking something negatively of you. And then that doesn't make you want to go and talk to other people. So it's like this, you're trapped in this loop of really craving connection, but not feeling like it exists out there, feeling like you're the only one who's experiencing loneliness. Everyone else seems to be having a wonderful time. They've got friends, they've got people to talk to and turn to, and it's like you're the only one in the world. So then when you go out into those social settings, you feel left out, because you've perpetuated in your mind that everyone else seems to be having a wonderful time. No one feels lonely. It's just you. There's something wrong with you, right? And then you're trapped in this whirlwind of fearing what other people think of you, that you're a bad person, or that you aren't deserving. And and then you go back to feeling lonely, right? And that's the loop of it. It's this self-perpetuating little ball of loneliness and self-doubt and anxiety and fear, which, like, it's so hard to get out of that mindset. I've found in my experience, loneliness can be one of the hardest emotions or like mental states to get out of, to move through, because, talking to people is such a necessary part of being able to move through a difficult time. But when you're lonely, you feel like you can't talk to anyone. You feel like no one understands you. You feel like you are isolated in your entire reality. And you feel like if you were to go out and tell someone like, oh, I'm craving connection, you feel stupid a little bit. Like, oh, how come you're craving connection? I'm here with my friends, like having a good time. Like, why aren't you feeling the same thing? Like, it's so silly that you want connection. Like, loneliness makes us feel almost a little bit, ridiculous for wanting to connect with people. And that's what stops us from going out and seeking help from other people, seeking advice from someone, because we feel a little bit silly for wanting to talk to people, because we see other people around us seem to be doing it right. They seem to have their friend group and someone to turn to. So yeah, loneliness can very much be a mental cage, and it's isolating as hell, and it's incredibly like painful. And it's so ironic to observe how our hunger for connection confines us, and it prevents us from actually seeking out connection. It keeps us locked inside our minds and our self-doubt and our limiting beliefs, because, we feel separated in some way or another from the rest of humanity, which is crazy to think. When you're not in that state of loneliness, it's crazy to think that one person can feel like they are the only one in the entire world that exists, or that the whole world is working against them and conspiring against them and thinks badly of them. Like, when you're not in that state of loneliness, it seems absurd that one person can have all that weight inside of them. But yeah, it's a really challenging emotion, and it's a really challenging experience of life that I'm sure everyone listening has experienced at some point or another, to some degree. But yeah, what I found is, I was doing a little bit of research on this. And what I found is, like, I was doing a little bit of research on loneliness. And I wanted to create this episode on loneliness, not because like I'm struggling with it right now or anything, but because I have in the past. A few years ago, I went through an incredibly lonely period in my life that lasted like, I'd say close to a year. It might have even been longer. but it was like chronic. It felt so isolating and so miserable, and I was struggling so much with it. So yeah, I did a little bit of digging on good old internet. Found quite a few articles about like statistics on loneliness, when we experience it, and kind of what happens when we are lonely. And one of the crazy statistics that I found is that chronic loneliness can actually change our biology on a nuclear level. So it can actually like change the makeup of who we are if we are lonely for like a long duration of time, which is insane. And then so that chronic loneliness can manifest as physical illnesses such as like heart disease, infection, cancer, obviously can affect our mental health, depression and anxiety and things like that. So even though loneliness is, an emotional experience, and it's a mental state, it can actually manifest as physical things, which is crazy. And honestly, I think that about almost every emotion. But yeah, there are actually studies on chronic loneliness and what it can do to us physically, which is wild. I also want to unpack what actually creates loneliness. Like, it can't just be something that we experience, it just like happens all of a sudden. There has to be a driving factor behind loneliness. Like, what experience creates loneliness, or what situation or environment causes us to feel loneliness more prominently in our lives. And I think living through a transitional period definitely brings about loneliness. And in my experience, that's what happened. It's when we're changing. Something in our life is changing, whether we're moving out of home, we're going traveling, people moving away from us, right? So something in our lives has changed. We're going through a phase in our life where a lot of things are changing all at once. And that tends to be when loneliness can present itself. That's when we can feel it. And I think why I'm so really keen to talk about loneliness today is because I feel like a lot of people in their, early 20s and things, young people, go through these transitional times. They go through these big periods of change. And so loneliness can be a big, not problem, but it can be, it's an experience that a lot of us young adults have. And yeah, I found a couple studies actually that showed that this is in fact the case. There was a 2022 study on like an Australian population that found that the age group of 15 to 24-year-olds have the highest levels of loneliness, right? So 1 in 5 men and 1 in 6 females aged 15 to 24 experience loneliness, or have experienced loneliness, or are experiencing some form of like isolation and, alienation and loneliness. And this study also stated that loneliness in our age group of 15 to 24-year-olds has been increasing since 2012. So it's only getting more and more prevalent, which is really sad, especially when you think about, when you feel lonely, you don't want to reach out to people because you think no one else can understand, when in fact, our age group are actually feeling lonely the most. We're feeling lonely the most. So there are actually a lot of other people out there when we go to these social events and things. A lot of people are going to understand because they're actually feeling it too, but we can't see that because we're trapped in our own mind of feeling isolated and separate from others. And then as well, I found a study, a 2018 study based in the US, which found that the age group of 18 to 25-year-olds had the highest prevalence of loneliness as well. And, it makes a lot of sense when you think about what causes loneliness, which is, change and living through a transitional time in our life, and going through new experiences. Because, like us young adults are doing that a lot. We're traveling, we're moving out of home, we're going to uni, we're going adventuring, we're finding ourselves. And that's a lot of change. And that's a lot of opportunities for us to feel lonely and to feel isolated and to feel like no one understands our experience, because of all this change, all of this newness happening at once, both physically and mentally. Like, you've got change happening in our outside, in our physical world, and then you've got change happening in our internal world because what affects our physical affects our mental. And so there's all of this newness going on, all this change, and it's and sometimes we can feel like no one can actually understand our human experience because it feels so complex, which is sort of how that sense of loneliness starts. When in reality, a lot of us feel it. Majority of us feel it, if not all of us at some point in our life. If you've got older people, your parents and things, like, it's all about reframing our mindset when we're in like a period of loneliness, to be like, there are people older than me who have been my age, who have probably had similar experiences. Like, I am not alone in this. At least one person can kind of get what's going on in my head. Like reframing our thoughts like that is super helpful in kind of getting us out of the slump that is good old loneliness. But yeah, I have a personal experience, if you will, about loneliness, and how like this all rings really true for me because I felt this so, like, to my bones, to my very core. I felt lonely and isolated and absolutely miserable with myself when I did go through a really big period of change, which was when I moved to Geelong. I moved out of home, moved to uni, and I felt so alienated, which made me not actually want to go and make connections. Like, I was craving connection so profoundly that I just wanted to stay home and like wish that someone would come knock on my door and be like, hey, do you want to be my bestie? Let's go out and go for an adventure together. Like, I was incredibly lonely. So yeah, I actually want to talk about that because I think if there is someone listening who maybe is in that really horrible period of loneliness, feeling like, the weight of the world is on their shoulders, I want to share this experience with you and let you know that it is normal, it is fine, you're going to be okay, it's not going to last forever, and you will find beautiful, beautiful, beautiful connections with lovely people. You've just got to be patient and you've just got to be kind to yourself. So, yeah, when I don't even know how old. I was an age. I think I was 19, about to turn 20, maybe? No. 18, turning 19. Um, yeah, I think so. Anyways, so yeah, I was about like 18 or 19 and I had moved to Geelong, dropped out of uni, whatever, moved to Geelong, and I was living with a couple people that I met at uni the previous year, and we were share housing, and it was the year that, it must have been 2021 because COVID had already been a thing, and we were somehow able, I forget, that must have been like, a bit of lenience with the COVID laws and all that fun stuff. And I was able to move out of home and move to Geelong. But we still had all these rules and things about like social settings. Like, you weren't allowed to dance in clubs. I remember that being one. Like, if you wanted to go out with your friends and stuff, you actually weren't allowed to dance. You had to sit down. So weird. So many things about that time in our lives that's completely strange now that we look back. But yeah, why that's important is because already when you're moving to a new place, right? You're moving to a town you've never been or a city or whatever. It's pretty scary. It's pretty frightening. And it can be a lonely period of time in itself. And then add on top of that all of the COVID stuff that was happening, where a lot of the time we weren't even actually allowed to go out. There was a time where we weren't actually allowed to be 5Ks from our house. So it just, all those COVID regulations added to that feeling of isolation, of feeling physically isolated as well as mentally isolated. And so, yeah, when I was living in Geelong, I was completely confused and lost internally and externally because I was in this new place and I felt like I didn't have enough friends, right? And I didn't know how to go out and make friends. And I felt like I didn't have enough friends and that I was bad at making friends and that I didn't know how to. And so I just went down this sort of rabbit hole of feeling like I didn't have anyone in my life that I was super close with and feeling disconnected from people but wanting to be more connected. And so it was actually a big chunk of my time. It was probably that entire year where I felt really alienated. I felt so lonely. I doubted myself. I always thought that people were judging me. I thought that if I talked to anybody about it, that they would judge me for not having any friends, for not being able to make friends. I thought, people would laugh at me if I said, oh, I'm really craving connection with people. I thought they would laugh and be like, oh, well, that's a bit silly. Like, we have our friends. Clearly, like, there's something wrong with you for not being able to make friends. Which is all just, fluffiness going on in our mind. Self-doubt, low self-esteem, whatever. But yeah, it was sad. It was an incredibly, incredibly sad time for me. And, not having someone there to be able to talk out those feelings with made it so much harder. And, I was feeling so alone, and COVID, all those regulations and things didn't help that feeling of, emotional loneliness. I actually felt physically alone too. And it was just a really painful experience to be having. And I felt like I was the only one, even though I was surrounded by people who as well had moved out of home, who were, I either knew people from university or I knew people who were a similar age who I would work with. I was working with people of similar ages, but I still felt like I was the only one who felt lonely. I felt like I was the only one who was struggling to meet people and to make friends and to just enjoy my life as it is. But I think another thing with loneliness is that it makes us see the bad more than the good. So like I was craving connection with people, and a big thing for me was I felt like every person that I met was like didn't share the same experience as me. I felt like everyone I met hadn't just moved away. I felt like it was just me. I was the only one. And what I noticed now is that when I would meet people and get to know them and their story, and, if someone would tell me that, oh, no, they're still living with their parents in Geelong, or, oh, no, they've been in Geelong for a few years, I've got a solid friend group, my mind would remember that the most. My mind would think, see, they don't understand how I'm feeling because they don't have the same experience. They're not, first year out of home in a new city, don't have any friends or connections or things. Like, they clearly don't understand what I'm going through. And so it's almost, I was sort of subconsciously seeking out validation for my loneliness, for my perspective of my loneliness. I was solidifying this belief that no one gets me, no one understands me, I can't connect with anyone because no one relates to me, because I was actually subconsciously going out there and my mind would actually, put little flags up and go, oh, see, they don't have the same experience as you, you're all alone, you're all by yourself. And it was a really strange experience to be having, because I was feeling lonely. I was craving connection. But every time I was actually having conversations with people, my mind was looking out for all of the ways that I was not connected to this person or similar to this person that I was talking to. It was almost like seeking out the differences and the disconnect as a way to validate my feelings of isolation and loneliness, which is really strange. But yeah, like that's what keeps us in that state of loneliness. That's what keeps us isolated, and it's what keeps us feeling like no one understands us and that we want to connect, but there's no one to connect with, because our brains are actually seeking out the disconnect when we do finally have the courage to go and have a conversation with someone or try and get to know a person. So yeah, that's like what I was experiencing when I'd moved out of home. And I think a lot of people experience the same thing of, feeling like no one understands, feeling like we don't have enough friends, or there's not enough people in our life that we feel close enough to share ourselves with. But yeah, it's really hard to come out of that place and fulfill that desire for connection with people. But in saying that, I think loneliness is a super important experience to have, and I think it reveals a lot of things to us when we are going through that experience, when we are in that experience, and it reveals a lot of things afterwards. Like even me right now speaking about my period of loneliness has helped me to actually understand what I learned from it in even more depth and realize a few things that I hadn't previously. And I think that's with any negative emotion anyways. You talk about it, you're always learning something from the experience, even long after you have felt it or long after you were there. But yeah, I think loneliness, it gives us the space to think about our feelings, and having space to think about our feelings is all part of having that self-awareness. And so, in that space, when we feel like we are all alone, all by ourselves, it gives us a chance to actually think about our past experiences, think about the problems that we're facing, think about our hopes and desires, what we want from ourselves in our lives. And I honestly think that, loneliness, it's all about yearning for connection and feeling like we're not receiving that connection. But I think loneliness is a beautiful time for us to actually try and unpack what we even want from that connection. We want beautiful relationships with people. We want to be able to open up and be vulnerable and be authentic. But on a deeper level, like, what do we actually want? Why do we want that? What does it look like in a relationship, in a friendship, in anything? Like, yes, it's one thing to say that loneliness is just, about wanting connection and feeling like you don't have it, but it's actually a time that allows us to realize what we want from life. It's a time to actually look at the relationships that we have in our lives, with family, with friends, unpack what's going on in those relationships, and then understand why they're not fulfilling us. When I had moved to Geelong and I was feeling lonely, I looked to my friendships and things that I was struggling in, and I was able to understand what specifically I didn't like about them, what specifically wasn't making me feel connected, and then pivot towards people and friendships that did fulfill those needs and did make me feel connected and fulfilled. Which I would never have found out. I wouldn't have realized the things that I value in people and in friendships and relationships and, in my family. I would not have discovered those desires that I needed if I hadn't gone through that massive period of loneliness. Because, it is a time to reflect. It is a really, it's a really potent time to go internally to dissect, what exists in our life and really unpack why it's not hitting the spot, why we don't feel like it's enough. And it's a massive wave to ride. It's really hard to be forced into this state of feeling like you're the only person in the world, feeling judged and anxious and have low self-esteem and self-doubt and just feeling separated. It's so hard to sit in that state and then look at our inner world and notice what isn't working, why it isn't working, and then ride the wave of, making it work, creating things that do work and do give us this sense of fulfillment. And I think in doing that, loneliness then teaches us how to be alone with ourselves, because it's so hard to go out and be social with people when we are feeling lonely. It's a time to reflect on our own company, of what we like about ourselves, of what we want to move towards, when we feel like even, struggling with things, even like I struggled with, going out and doing things by myself, of going to the beach, of going and, playing around like a child in the park. I struggled with doing that by myself. But I felt like I needed to, or I had to, because I didn't feel like I could go with anyone else. So it actually shows us that it actually, helps us get comfortable in our own company in sort of a roundabout way. Not because we want to do things alone, but because we feel like there's no one to do them with. But it can actually help us build a relationship with ourselves and get to know who we are. And then, like, in that state of being alone with ourselves, of getting to know who we are, that opens up the space for mindfulness, of being self-aware. And, the more time that we spend with ourselves and understanding who we are at a really deep level, we're able to relate to others more. Because if we can understand our experiences and our emotional states and sort of what we deserve from the world and whatnot, then we're able to understand other people's experiences a lot more, And I think loneliness can teach us that. I think the way to get out of a period of loneliness is to start doing things by yourself. It is, even though we feel so horrible about it, we feel like people are judging us because, they don't have any friends, they're doing things by themselves. That's so lame, that's so boring of them, but the only way I think to get out of loneliness is to actually do it, is to actually, take your own hand and go for a walk or go play somewhere, or, nurture that little kid inside of you who feels lonely, and hold your own hand and do the things that you want to do. Go for an adventure by yourself. That's how you get out of, that mental cage of loneliness, is you've got to be your own friend. Even with all of your fears and other people, judging you and thinking that you're boring and you're lame and you're doing things by yourself. Like, you have to do things by yourself in order to get out of the confines of loneliness. And in doing that, in doing these activities with yourself, you get to know yourself, right? You become self-aware. You notice the little quirks about yourself. You notice your mannerisms, and, you start to notice like, this reminds me a lot of this person, which I don't like about them. Like, maybe I don't like it about them because I actually do it and I haven't accepted that part of myself. Like, you unpack a lot when you're doing things by yourself. And then the more you learn about yourself, the more you can understand other people's experiences and hold space for them, and have that empathy and compassion and relate to them. And I think in a roundabout way, it does take loneliness to be able to go deeper within yourself to then connect with others. it's definitely been true in my experience that, hard-hitting periods of loneliness, those ones where it's like ongoing, like chronic, like it's lasting and you feel like it's never going to go away. I think those periods of loneliness allow us to appreciate ourselves and what we have to offer. We build our self-esteem back up, we build our confidence, and we sort of, unpack all of our limiting beliefs and repeated patterns of behavior. We unpack all of that so that we can show up and have those meaningful connections with people. We're able, I think, in my experience, like, I think we're able to build those fulfilling, soulful connections with people when we unpack our loneliness, when we unpack our feelings of not having our sense of connection met. We're able to redirect. I truly think that loneliness is it's a pivotal time to look at yourself, to look at the lack of connection that you're feeling, to look at the isolation and the loneliness you're feeling, and redirect towards a path that is aligned to that connection, to that deep, fulfilling human interaction. It's a wonderful way to deepen your relationships with people and be more vulnerable and be authentic, because you know how excruciatingly painful it is to be lonely and to have that hunger of social connection, that now you're not going to take it for granted. And I think that's what loneliness really, really shows to us and reveals. And, I think ever since I experienced that major period of loneliness in my life when I moved to Geelong, ever since then, I have been having my connection cup like filled and filled and filled, and just it's overflowing. Sometimes I actually can't believe how many beautiful people that I have met in my life and connected to and am still connected to. Like the depth of my relationships has increased dramatically since coming out of that big chunk of loneliness. And so I am forever grateful for having that huge experience of loneliness, even though at the time it was so horrible. It was actually probably the worst experience emotionally. It was the hardest thing that I've ever sort of been through emotionally. But now coming out of it, I know exactly what I want in my life. I know exactly what I need to make me feel fulfilled and connected when it comes to other people, when it comes to relationship dynamics. I know what I need. I know what fills my cup. And I owe all of that to experiencing loneliness, of feeling like I was missing something, some deep innate part of being human. I felt like I was missing some part of that, which is connection. And ever since that, I trust myself that I can form relationships with people who fill my cup, who make me feel whole, make me feel seen and heard and loved and just valued. And that is what can happen when we allow ourselves to sit in our loneliness, when we unpack it internally. It can really help us become grounded in our aloneness, which then helps us better seek out people that fill our cup, that make us feel amazing. And so the quality of your life is just like, it just skyrockets from there. Which, like that has been true for me. And I hope that other people who have experienced periods of loneliness can relate to this. And I hope that if you are going through a big period of feeling lonely, that there are only good things ahead. There is only an abundance of connection ahead. The more deeply you feel disconnected right now, I think equates to how connected you're going to feel in the future, so let yourself be disconnected, explore the ways that you feel alone, explore the ways that you're feeling disconnected, because they're the ways that you're going to find that connection in the future and be incredibly overjoyed with how deep and vulnerable and authentic your relationships are in the future. But yeah, I really hope that you have enjoyed listening to this episode and you've got something valuable out of it. I've really enjoyed recording it. Yeah, if you did like it, be sure to share it around. Share it with your friends, especially. Definitely. Honestly, I think if you were to share any of these episodes so far, probably share this one because loneliness is that feeling of isolation and that you can't reach out and that you can't ask for help. And so I think, if you share this with a friend, you never know, it could actually be something that they really freaking needed to hear, and that helps them get through the heavy weight of feeling lonely. But yeah, thank you for listening, my lovely cherubs, and I am excited to return next week with another episode. But yeah, that's all from me for today. I love you all. Thank you for listening. But for now, the world is waiting for you, so get on out there and enjoy your big, beautiful life. Bye.